I'm Janet Connor, prayer artist, and I've been called to do a lot of work as a prayer artist. Hearing prayer artist in the middle of the night, February of 2018, completely changed my life. Everything I offer, everything I do, everything I write. But I think it's just been training for this radical love prayer practice. They are all our children. There may be no one else in America that can tell the story I'm about to tell or feel the non-negotiable call that I feel, because in 2013, I was a mother with a child in prison. My son was very active in college, in the political life in New York City, Occupy, and it really has become the call of his life to do everything he can to change the world we live in. Well, that got the attention of the FBI, and eventually he received not one but two subpoenas to appear before a secret federal grand jury to basically name names, to tell the government the names of other activists. The world hasn't changed much since the late 50s and the House Committee on Un-American Activities, has it? And so there I was in a New York City courtroom while a federal judge screamed at my son to answer his questions. And my son stood silent as he had been instructed by his attorneys, because if you answer one question, then you have to answer all questions, and the questions were going to lead to, who do you know, who are these people? And so he stood silent, and the judge screamed at him, "Don't you know what I can do to you?" And then the judge did it. He sent my son, who was charged with nothing, accused of nothing. We're not talking about any kind of trial. He sent my son to a high security federal prison in order to coerce him to name names. Perhaps you've heard of some other famous cases like this. There's a reporter in New York City that spent a long time in prison because she refused to name her sources, as all good reporters do, right? So there I was with a son in federal prison, proud of him, but still unbelievably worried. And as time went on, he began to fall apart in prison until finally in October, he was sent to prison in May. He really had a complete meltdown. And I needed help. And help came in two forms. Number one, my dear friend Emma Cooper Mitchell in Hawaii requested permission from her Kumu teacher for permission to give me Ho'oponopono, the traditional Ho'oponopono, which you are now going to be introduced to in this prayer practice. And I contacted the masters and teachers of the Akashic Record through the brilliant Laurel Bunn, and they told me a prayer practice. They said to gather a critical mass of people, turned out to be 100, stretching from Hawaii all the way to Switzerland. And they told us to gaze with love at a picture of the prison that held my son. And we were to actually look, and I don't know that you can see the address. This is the picture I looked at every day and shared with those 100 people. It's a much larger complex than this. There are 954 people in it. And my son was up here on the 9th floor. But they were very clear about this prayer practice. We are not holding the intention that one man, one of those 954 people, gets out of prison. There were to be no words. We were to simply gaze for 5 minutes at this picture of this prison and shower it with unconditional love, divine love. And not just Jerry, one person in one floor of this prison. We were to see this unconditional love showering everyone in the prison, employees, the guards, the cooks, the drivers, all of the attorneys involved with everyone in prison, the prosecutors, the defenders, the judges, like the judge who put my son in prison, the people that come to visit. And I was one of those people that came to visit. It's an astonishing experience to actually enter into the prison system. And so we did it for 68 days. These 100 people joined me at 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern, and we simply looked with unconditional love at this picture of this prison. And the masters and teachers told me, I wasn't to tell the whole world about this, but they said that I was to see the black. Call it the evil, the hate, the fear, the trauma, lifting off the prison. And I did. I sat right here at 11 a.m. every day and looked at this picture and saw lifting off of it in space these black specks. And then I was to transmute those black specks. I was to say, and this is exactly what Ho'oponopono is all about, it cleanses, purifies, and transmutes all of the negative, what the masters and teachers told me were these black specks, into the pathway of light. The universe, the divine, can take this fear, this trauma, this anger, this racism, all of the languaging around, let's just call it evil, it can be transmuted back into the pathway of light. Maybe I can't do it, but the divine can. And so I did this, and I also got these rocks, and on every single one of them, I wrote the date of one more day that my son was in prison. This was day 194. It was a Monday in December. And on the back, I would sometimes write something. This says, appellate court argument, oral arguments. Oral arguments were made in the appellate court on that day. He wasn't released. And I created this bowl every single day he was in prison is in this bowl. I created an altar of freedom for him and received countless gifts from all of you. And I wore this. This stone was a very pale cream color. It comes from the Camino in Spain. You see the shell that is the symbol of the people on the pilgrimage. And I haven't put it on since my son was released from prison, but I think I now must wear this every day for the children in the prison, and they are all our children. Their mothers, their fathers. There are some older people, some grandparents have brought their children. They're all our children. So here's what happened. It was easy to give up hope. He ended up in prison for 253 days, the bulk of his 24th year of his life. The 100 began the light to the prison in November, and he was released at the end of January. So we did this for 68 days. And there didn't appear to be any movement. Nothing seemed to be happening. And we approached the winter holidays, passed through the new year, and nothing. And even my son said, I just have to accept that I'm going to be in prison until the secret federal grand jury is unseated next April. There was one person who wasn't willing to give up. Me and this critical mass, these 100 magnificent people, showering this prison with unconditional love for 5 minutes. On January 28th, the phone rang, and it was a collect call. You don't take collect calls anymore, but something told me I should, and it was my son calling from the lobby of the courthouse, which is adjacent to this prison. And he said that suddenly a marshal came and got him, put him in handcuffs, carried him through all the tunnels and everything, brought him to the lobby and said, undid him and said, you're free, and turned around and left. So he saw a phone and called me collect. And I scrambled to, find his people and couldn't get a hold of anybody immediately. So Jerry called me back a few minutes later, kind of panicky. He was so afraid that some marshal was going to come back and say, I made a mistake. And so in his cotton prison duds at the end of January in New York City, little cotton shoes, he ran the, 8 or 10 blocks to the attorney's office. Can you imagine when they opened the door? So, of course, I'm thrilled. I notified the 100 people who've been praying. We're all thrilled. But what happened? I wanted to know. I wanted to go beyond or deeper than the celebration of my son is no longer in prison. I wanted to understand what happened. How did this prayer practice work? And I contacted the masters and teachers of the Akashic Record. And they said that our critical mass of people showering the prison and everyone connected with it, that includes the judge, with this unconditional light, and me saying Ho'oponopono. And I must tell you, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. It isn't that I don't know anything about forgiveness. If you have read Writing Down Your Soul, you know that this entire life I have as a prayer artist began by forgiving my husband. And then when I saw in the newspaper that the judge who refused to protect my son and me during the divorce, he died young, 56, an addict. My ex-husband died young, 56, an addict. And I actually sat here and shed tears of forgiveness for the judge, because I finally understood from reading in that article that everyone in his family was the victim of domestic violence. The police had been to his home 13 times. And I suddenly realized why he could not protect my child, because he was doing exactly the same thing. So I forgave my husband, and you know the miracle that ensued if you've read Writing Down Your Soul as a result. I forgave the judge. I really thought I knew something about forgiveness. I knew nothing. Forgiving the judge, holding the piece of paper for Ho'oponopono and saying it for the judge was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was also the deepest prayer I've ever said. But I'm telling you, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. There were days that I sat in that chair. I could look at the prison, I could shower it with love, but when it came to trying to asking to cut all of the negativity around the judge's heart and have it be transmuted to the pathway of light so he could be free the prayer ends with, "You're free." There were days I couldn't do it. And I actually at one point threw my Bible across this room, screaming at Jesus, screaming, "You came up with this crap about forgive your enemies, love your enemies. Well, guess what? I can't do it. You do it." And I stormed out that door. The next day, however, I'd be back, and I did it. I did it for 68 days. So the masters and teachers explained that at a mystical level, at a deep level, what happened in my saying Ho'oponopono and the 100 people showering the prison with unconditional light, which loosened, so to speak, if you could visualize the darkness. They said what happened is that the prayer got the judge to ask himself a question he had never asked before. This is a man in his mid-80s. What is authority? And indeed, as I read the release statement, which was 21 pages long, and the first 21 and a half pages was ugly, about how awful this young man is, and that the judge hates everything this man stands for. And all the people that have supported Jerry through his imprisonment. But then, suddenly, this far from the bottom, the judge suddenly wrote, "But I do not have the authority to keep him in prison." Signed his name, and Jerry was released. So they explained that what happens in a mystical prayer practice like this is the unconditional love touches the part of the soul that is uncorrupted and uncorruptible. No matter what harm we do, there is in us this perfect love, this soul essence, this divinity. And that unconditional love prayer practice, cutting the cords in Ho'oponopono, awakens, helps the person remember who they really are. An expression of the divine, a child of the divine. Perfect, pure, sacred. Now, this can be hard to see when you look around. There's so much pain in the world. The gun violence in the United States of America is just overwhelming. The refugees everywhere in the world is overwhelming. And this particular prison system, the immigrant detention system, it's a prison system. It is still concentration camps, whatever languaging you put around it. And there's something very important for you to know. Something that I never thought about in my entire life. Something I was oblivious to until I visited my son in prison. You have to go through a massive amount of steps to visit someone in a high security federal prison, in any prison. And in one of them, I saw all of the women, it was almost all women, lining up to visit their lovers, husbands, sons, because it was visitation day for a male ward. And the women would rush to put $10, $20 in $1 bills into these vending machines with junk in it, Coca-Cola and potato chips. At what's shocking, like how can a bottle of water cost $6? And they would put in a small fortune in order to be able to give someone they loved once the cages were opened. And they're cages. They are cages. The children are in cages. My son was in a cage. The prison system is cages. And then they could give this small offering of potato chips, processed cheese to someone they loved. And if you want the person that you know in prison to have toothpaste, a toothbrush, socks, a clean t-shirt, you have to buy them at astronomical cost. And so people would donate money every month to a fund, which would then be transferred to Western Union. So cost, in order for him to have a little money in what they called the commissary, so that twice a week he could order things like toothpaste. So I looked at this. Wait a second, this is a business. Wait a second, this is a business. And then when I visited my son and his skin began to deteriorate because there's no fresh food, there's no real food. You're eating nothing but processed food. And it dawned on me, wait a second, that somebody is supplying the processed food. And in the prison system, sooner or later, everybody is on, they get diabetes too because they're not eating real food. And now they're all medicated. Well, somebody's got the contract for the medication. And I began to see that the prison system is an extraordinarily profitable business. Somebody's being paid to build the prisons. Somebody's being paid to run the prisons. So where does this money come from? Let's look at the immigrant detention centers, over 200 of them in the United States. The taxpayer, you and me, and thank you to our friends everywhere in the world who are joining us in this prayer practice, because they are all our children. But the American taxpayer is paying the salaries of the ICE people, the guards, the police, all of the people who bring the migrants to the centers. The American taxpayer is paying the contracts, which are awarded to basically two businesses that own all of these massive, you can see just by looking at that one picture of Dilley, Texas. It looks like an army barracks. It's huge. They're not all that huge, but this is a massive prison industrial business. And it is creating millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of profit for the people that have to supply the food and the employees. And every speck, every one of those dollars is coming from the American taxpayer. Prison is a business. And we are funding that business. Now, that business can only exist if there's people in the cages, right? And so, in the American prison system, in order for these people to make all this profit, we got to have bodies in the cages. And what has worked for 2 decades is the war on drugs. The war on drugs is the war on people of color. And so, in order to have people in those cages, the police would actually be ordered, it came out in particular in New York City, but it's true all over, that you better have X amount of arrests per week, per month. And so where are you going to find a criminal to put in these cages? Oh, let's just go into the inner city and find some kid walking around with a little bit of crack. And bingo, you have hundreds of thousands of young, primarily people of color. And sure enough, when I went to visit my son, and they opened the cage and began to let those men out to meet the people that have come to visit them, primarily women with children, these men started to come out. Beautiful, young, vibrant, peak of their vitality, brown and black men, and one white kid. I'm sorry that my son was ever imprisoned, but it's an education, an awareness that I treasure. I know that sounds, but it has awakened me. I would not be creating They Are All Our Children if I had not been one mother with one child in prison, if I had not learned that the prison system is a business, if I had not learned that this prayer practice can change the hearts of the business people who benefit from this system. And so I am now inviting you to please join us in a critical mass. 100 people in 68 days last time did perform a miracle, and that miracle did, I'm certain, save my son's life. Now, would you please join me in saving thousands and thousands and thousands of lives, in changing the consciousness that has created this system, a consciousness of fear, a consciousness of the immigrants are bad, they're taking our jobs, and all of that racist propaganda that has been perpetrated, particularly in the last couple of years, and is reaching some bizarre crescendo in the United States of America. You can't separate the gun mass murders and the migrant detention. It's one complex, it's one consciousness of I'm not safe. Me, the white middle class, somehow there are people in America who've gotten the idea that the principles of America make them unsafe. And so they have to put people in cages. They have to other them, separate them. And while we're doing this, let's make a profit. And so I contacted the masters and teachers of the Akashic Record and asked them for guidance. The call came after Elizabeth Cunningham was on my show, Praying the Speed of Love, and we began to talk about the camps because she wrote books about Mary Magdalene. And she said, suddenly, I really felt it was Mary Magdalene speaking through her, what would Jesus do? What would Mary Magdalene do? And they lived at a time that was as racked with anger and hate and oppression, oppressive governments. You got to go pretty far to find an oppressive government worse than Rome in the first century in Palestine, although it looks like America is getting to that same place. And so are many other pockets of oppression around the world. And as she said, what would Mary Magdalene and Jesus do? We both got teary because the answer is forgive. Love your enemies, do good to those who hurt you. And that night I was awakened by a very loud, I would say I was being screamed at. Prayer artist, do something. And I shook. I lifted off the mattress. Okay. Because I was one mother with one child in prison. I can tell you this story. No one else can tell the story of contacting the masters and teachers and learning about a prayer practice of unconditional love, and bingo, a miracle ensues. Now we have to be that miracle. Every single one of us is the mother and father of every single migrant in a detention center and the ones on their way. It's climate change. It's all of the evil policies of the American government for 100-something years now. We have been meddling in Mexico and Central America, supporting dictators. This is our history. And now it has come to our doorstep. And the only thing I know to do is to shower this prison system, these concentration camps, with unconditional love. Have that love loosen, release, and in Ho'oponopono transmute everything back to first love, original love. The masters and teachers gave me some guidance about how to set this up. That we are to look at the picture of Dili right next to the map. Terrifying map, isn't it? Of the over 200 complexes. The entire country is now a concentration camp. And we are to plug in, like plugging into a docking station with a USB port at 1 o'clock in the Eastern time zone in the United States, which would pick up a massive part of the world, or 1 o'clock in London, picking up many time zones in Europe, or 1 o'clock in the Pacific Rim, picking up a wide raft of time zones. They described it as a heartbeat. Ba-ba-bum, 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 ba-ba-bum. And they said the heartbeat is important. So when you look at the time zone possibilities, find something that plugs into some time. We're pretty much covered the world. And please bring your friends. We were 100 last time. What is the critical mass for this? I don't know. But it's a logarithmic increase of 100. And so every single day, would you please give 11 minutes for love, unconditional love. In another video, you can see what the prayer practice is. We gaze with love, which begins the process. That was so important. The masters and teachers had us look at this prison. And then we sing a song to the children, letting them know we're here. We are taking responsibility. You are our children. It's a very short song. They woke me up and sang it to me. Although a lot of you are now going to sing your own songs and post them in our private Facebook group. Then shower that map, the picture of Dili with unconditional love. I do have a guided meditation, but you can simply, as you get to feel your way into the practice, simply look at it with love if that speaks to you more than the guided meditation. And then please say Ho'oponopono. This is a Ho'oponopono designed specifically for they are all our children. And then close with a prayer of gratitude to our mother, the first mother, the divine feminine, Sophia, Shakti, whatever name or nature you see her as. Our Lady, Queen of Heaven, the Black Madonna. She is all our mothers. The entire process is 11 minutes. Please join me and thousands around the world to shower the prism with love. And I hope someday, I don't know how to immortalize it, but I hope we can come together to celebrate the closing of the camps, the freeing of the children, forgiveness, hope, love, mercy, compassion. These are the energies of love. They've already called you or you wouldn't be here. Now, through your heart, your voice, your eyes, your love, mercy, love, forgiveness, compassion are going to move through space and time to touch the hearts of the people, all the people who think that children belong in cages. Let us all take responsibility for love, because they are now all our children. From one mother with one child, all the mothers, all the fathers are going to free all the children. Thank you. I love you.